Hi guys, welcome to week 2, and in week 2 we're going to look at violence in the media. Now I hope this is the closest many of you have come to actually experiencing violence and not actually had any violence in your life really in reality, or either by committing it or suffering from it. But it's also very likely that you have experienced some violence in the media because it's all around us, right? There's violent movies, violent video games, violence in the news, violent stories, violence everywhere, and different kind of scales of violence, okay? And these debates are, so what? So what about violence in the media? On one hand of the spectrum, we talk about the freedom. On the media side, I'm going to go on the media side, right? So media is about the freedom to accept and the freedom to express, right? So the freedom to express and the freedom to enjoy, right? And it doesn't actually do anything, right? And this is common in debates, many debates about the media. Just because people consume violence or pornography or any other type of thing, they can make a distinction between entertainment, art, literature from actual real life practice, right? So many societies that consume lots of violence don't necessarily go on to commit violence themselves. It's also about whether or not this freedom has a utility. Okay, so you can talk about this freedom from an abstract sense and the freedom without harm, but the freedom, given this so much freedom, what exactly does the media do? And I think, again, in debates about the media, and you need to talk about this, especially if the media is doing controversial stuff, right? That this freedom to consume media or anything that may be bad helps people, right? It helps people understand or experience things that they've never experienced before. And that's what the media is for, right? I watch a violent, horrible movie because there's no way that's going to happen to myself. Like watching a movie about war or watching a movie, about rape or assault, all of these things. And it makes me feel bad, but it allows me to experience something, and that adds value to my life. But it also helps understanding, okay, of an issue, of a reality out there, or even if it is beyond reality, it allows me to understand what could be some of these things beyond reality, like watching a movie about a fantastic, incredible serial killer that's just not real, right? Or about future space and stuff that is not real, well, not real yet. That's so horrific in its violence that it scares you, changes the way you think about the world today, allows you to appreciate something, not appreciate something else, or just stretches your mind and your imagination and impacts your creativity and is healthy and allows you to live more. Okay, so I think this is an interesting aspect of the media, but especially when talking about violence, to firstly discuss the freedom, okay, to express and for the media and for people to enjoy, but then discuss the utility of that freedom, right? And some of this can still be a little bit fluffy when you talk about the role that art plays in society. And art is always about showing you things that are to some extent impossible, but also to some extent things that can be real. And you can show both of these things. To some extent, art is about depicting reality, and the truth is a lot of reality is pretty horrific, right? If I want to watch a movie about World War II or about genocide or about the Spanish Inquisition, about torture in the old days, that's going to have a lot of violence in it, and that's, reality. But even if it's not real, it allows me to experience something that helps me feel more human and stretches my ability to experience, to enjoy, to understand. And that's what art is all about, right? But if art is so powerful, and this is where we come to the other side, it must have some shape. And the big attack on the media level is the impact of the media. And you say that it does have a correlation. If it is helping people to understand and to learn and to experience, right, then it can't just be about enjoyment. That it must have some shift on your personality. If I read many books about romanticism or about nature and I learn about it and that changes my personality, the way reading religious texts makes me a more understanding, supposedly kind, maybe compassionate, hopefully person, then enjoying and consuming and being influenced by violent media should have an impact on my ability, or not ability, well, maybe even ability, because I learn new tips and techniques, also my predisposition, my likelihood to violence, right? To commit violent acts. So it increases your predisposition to violence. Okay? So that's the argument that you will make on the other side, or your predisposition to anything. Okay? And you talk about why specifically then this is bad, why violence specifically, and I think this part will be interesting, right? So it's hard to show, and this will be the challenge on the other side, that anybody who watches violent movies becomes violent or engages any kind of violent content. Obviously, and we know that's true, even many people who engage in violent sports don't necessarily become violent people themselves, right? So you have to talk about it as an additional factor, as one more thing that normalizes a sense of violence, that may encourage you to commit violence, that makes that violence easier. It reduces the distance between you and violence, and you say that that's bad. Okay, so of course there are many other things. It doesn't affect everybody, but as long as it has some kind of impact, or the quality of that impact, it is something that is quite powerful. All right, and that's the basic framework here. These are some debates that you may have done before, or good examples of this context, right? So violent video games is one. I love this debate because it's something that's so common and people use more and more and more. And there is the video games aspect, that to distinct this from other types of media, from just movies or books, because video games are immersive and you actually get close to committing acts of violence, right? Even if it's just pushing a button. Right? I'm pushing a button and someone dies. It's like drone operators, right? You push a button and someone dies. And it detaches you from that violence, but it also attaches you in a way because you get a rush from it. You get a bit of a thrill from killing people. And this is what I mean about narrowing the distance between you and a violent act. But at the same time, there still is distance, and that distance is important. And people are getting enjoyment, and as long as they can separate it, they should be able to separate it, right? So that's, I think, a great debate about violence in media. Then there's this one, obviously, a classic, blood sports. And this is slightly different in the sense that people aren't directly participating in it. I'm not at home playing a violent video game, but you're watching other people. So there is that other person's aspect to it, right? So these other individuals have the ability, the right to participate, to engage, to fight, and these other individuals are watching them. And this is something that we can trace back through thousands of years, that we watch other people engage in violence, because every society has a war component to it. And this is how you celebrate maybe or train people who engage in that warlike component. Okay, so I think that's an interesting aspect. What's challenging in this debate is separating the violence of blood sports from the violence in the streets. And if you can show how that's different, why these individuals are different, and so people get something different from it, from violence in the streets, then that will help you in the debate to defend it. And obviously the correlation between watching sports and, committing violent acts. That makes a big difference. And that's an exciting part about that debate. The last one, and this is the one we're going to discuss in greater detail, is about, and I think this is slightly tricky too. And I like this debate as well, because the correlation is much softer, right? The music glorifies violence, and specifically against women. So that context also helps you. But this isn't, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but this debate is about creating an environment where violence is normalized or seen as positive. It doesn't specifically train you to commit violence. It doesn't celebrate people who have committed violence. Doesn't show you ways to commit violence, doesn't say you should commit violence, but it kind of says it's cool, right? Maybe, or because it already happens, and it's celebrating that violence. And what is that impact of an environment where that violence is cool? So let's get into that, but I hope that roughly overall here you can see the debate about, on one side, media and violence as enjoyment and you know, to develop the stuff we were talking about in terms of freedom and expanding your mind, and the other hand on the impact that it will have on people and how the slightly different context makes a difference, right? So here you have to get into the details. You have to show why the video games are different, why the blood sports are different, and why this type of music is different, and also the context here on women, right? Why those things are different. So let's get to it, shall we? Ban music that glorifies violence against women. So I think the really important things to talk about here is what do you mean by glorify, okay, and why, and to what extent you're going to ban. It's hard to really draw a line, but I think you talk about glorification as a celebration. So this is not necessarily, not always just encouraging, right? Because then the other side will say this is hate speech. It's not an artist saying, hey, go kill this woman, go kill this woman. But an artist is saying, like, it's awesome that I beat women, that, you know, I treat women like crap, and it's cool, and, you know, women don't deserve these things, and all these, you know, stuff is glorified. It's made it seem like it's something that's awesome and cool and wonderful and special, and that's what you talk about, right? So if you have some interesting lyrics you want to share, this is the time for you to share it. And don't worry if it's controversial, it makes it honest. And the truth is, many people have, you know, they've heard these things. And sometimes you hear it and you don't really listen to it. You just hum along to how I want to smack that whatever person, blah, blah, blah. And then you stop and go like, oh my God, did I actually just say I want to smack that person in this way that's terrible, but it's so catchy. I want to keep, you know, singing. We'll get to that part, and that's one of the things that I think is specifically pernicious and dangerous about music. Okay, so that's in regards to the glorification, right? How you define glorification. And in terms of banning, I think make it a commercial ban. So ban the selling, ban the playing of this music. It's hard for you to ban anybody who sings any song. So if someone puts a video on YouTube, if people want to sing for a concert, like, you're like, that's a little bit outside the scope. But we're talking about this rich, popular, famous artists, this, you know, this Robin Thicke type of thing, right? You talk about the Blurred Lines song and make that your context. And I think it's helpful if you can narrow the context and use a few songs as examples and a few artists as examples. Okay? Stanzo. Music shapes a harmful mindset. And I think it's important here to talk about these mindsets, because it's hard for you to say, and I'm not sure it actually does, make someone commit a crime specifically by listening to a type of song, but it shapes a mindset. And why is that mindset dangerous and unhelpful? Arguments. 3. Number 1, music shapes your personality. So this is broadly talking about the value of music. And if you can show that music is really powerful in shaping your personality, then violent music will shape a violent personality. 2nd, break down the effect. And here is where you kind of build in the harm from it. And finally, talk about the necessity of banning. Why ban? And here you can step back and talk about the industry in general, and talk about commercialization and why we need to take a strong step and send a powerful message, okay? So firstly, let's talk about music. Now, it may seem like something that's really harmless and everyone listens to music, but if you think about it, you know, music is really powerful, right? Every culture has music. Traditionally, people use music. Music has been used in times of war to rile up people's emotions, right? There's a national anthem that when you listen will make you feel something because it's associated with something else. There are music that people use in religious ceremonies. They can send someone into a trance. Music can set the mood and the tone, right? When you watch a movie, there's a specific horror music and you hear the music, you already feel like something's going to happen. So we associate sounds, music with things, with feelings, with emotions, with values. And this is more beyond the singer, right? You can talk about the pop idols and stuff as well, but I want to focus more on just that music. So that the music is powerful. It's not just something you listen and has no impact on you. And it's really powerful because a lot of the time you don't really think about that impact, right? You don't really go like, oh, that music made me feel this way. You just listen to the music and it makes you feel some way, right? And that's what we think is particularly pernicious and particularly dangerous. And this will normalize a violent mindset. So when you hear about violence a lot, you internalize the violence, right? It becomes something that becomes normal to you in both aggressors and victims. So we say how women accept these things, right? And feel like it's normal, that men treat them that way and are more likely to accept it, are more likely to put themselves into a situation where that would happen, are more likely to forgive their victims, are less likely to stop it from happening, right? So you see how, people who say very sexist things, and in some environment, someone may just say it because you think it's normal to say this really sexist thing, and people will laugh it off. And if I'm a woman there also, I'll just like, it's okay. It's just like casual sexism, right? And we think that that's bad because you internalize these casual sexist remarks and statements, and it sets your frame of mind. So the casual sexist music becomes casual sexist conversation, becomes casual sexist actions, becomes casual, normal sexism, right? And that's the first argument, and I think that's the big, powerful argument that you need to run to show that music has an impact and is valuable. Secondly, break down that impact, right? So talk about microaggression. So it may not necessarily be like I listen to violent music, I go home and I beat my girlfriend in her face or beat random women in the face, but it just makes me a little bit more aggressive towards them. And if I'm already a more aggressive person, it may justify my aggression because now it's normal and it seems like a positive thing that people have celebrated and are recognized, that clubs are playing, that shopping malls are playing, that everybody's playing this violent, aggressive music towards women. It must be cool to commit violent, aggressive things to women, right? Obviously, because everyone is doing it. This is not just some underground club. These are Grammy award-winning, artists who are singing about violence towards women and treating women like crap. So it may empower this already kind of violent people, but it may lead to people who are, maybe in the middle or slightly sexist to do a little bit of micro nasty things like being more curt with women, like putting women down, like not giving them opportunities, restricting their rights, so you may treat your spouse like crap, you may treat your daughters like crap, you may treat, your female employees like crap, because you think that they are all lesser than you because of the music that you've internalized. And this is harmful to women, even if it doesn't specifically like physically harm them, it reduces the opportunities they have. It means that they work in a more harmful, less peaceful environment and are exposed to more aggression. And it puts them into a more negative frame of mind, doesn't help them to actualize themselves and express themselves and feel fully comfortable, right? And this is the discrimination and verbal abuse and all of these things that they suffer. So this is still a huge amount of suffering, and this is bad, right? So paint that picture and develop that and show how these things are super bad. So, and by showing this, it becomes more about culture and impact, which I think is, which ties in nicely to talking about music. Last but not least, talk about banning. And I think this is where you can step back and talk about the corporate culture, right? So talk about record labels, talk about all these artists, right? So when artists do well, making, derogatory music about women, when you have music videos where women are all like scantily clad or naked or dancing and they do well, then other people are going to do it. Okay, and then people see that and then they want to do it. And so if I'm a woman who wants to join the recording industry, I have to be sexy and I have to do all of these sexual things, and it becomes sexualized. If you are a young like rap star guy and you want to make a music video, they're going to put women behind you and you're going to make a hit song about, sexy BB something, whatever, and all of that stuff. And it becomes reinforcing, right? And this argument is also trying to deal with the whole discourse thing that's going to come up. Why the like free market of ideas won't work, isn't enough, why that's a problem, right? Because there is a huge corporate culture that will be really, really hard to combat, okay? And while you're doing all of this, you can draw parallels to other kinds of, isms like racism, religionism maybe, but racism I think is a big one. If there was like really explicit racist musicians, they won't win awards, you won't see them getting record labels, yet you can be a sexist musician and do really well. And in fact, sometimes they expect you to be a little bit sexist in order to do well. Okay? So that's the Gov case. Focus a lot on the music and run a big, hard anti-sexism case and bring up all these examples. I think you need to have the examples to show why it's really bad. And throw the examples in POIs if you have POIs and all of that, because it forces the other person, the other side, to show why you need to talk about or how it can be positive on any level to call women some of the things that they are calling women and to portray women in some of the ways in which women are portrayed in those videos. Okay, let's get to the other side then, it seems. So why should we be allowed to call women all these really bad things? So on the other side, you make a distinction. You don't have to support sexism, obviously, please do not. You say that is and can be really terrible things. But just like, violence and stuff in general, if I watch a violent movie, doesn't mean I'm a violent person, but it means that I can find that to some extent entertaining. I can reject it, and it provokes me in a sense. But that is a part it's a tool, right? And that tool plays a role in creating a feeling, right? And that feeling can be positive, can be negative, but it's trying to depict something. Okay, so and I can appreciate that without necessarily having to commit that myself, and we can draw a distinction, right? So I can listen to rap music and not be a rapper, and that's how people can appreciate cultures which they do not necessarily partake of or represent or mimic, but they can listen to it. Okay, right. So that's the general position on opposition, which I'll get into. But specific position, I think on op, you can argue for ratings and education, but not remove choice. On op, your big line is about choice and talk about how it needs to be that individual's choice. Suppressing their choice doesn't necessarily change their point of view and could actually maybe reinforce their point of view and why that's negative. So tell people, talk about it, you can speak up against it and you can say that it's bad. And we think that maybe some situations you don't need to do it, maybe you shouldn't do it, etc., but you shouldn't ban it, okay? And then talk about this part. So that's what I was kind of saying earlier, that obviously the violence is bad, but this doesn't help. You need to separate those two things, right? Stance, music, powerful tool, entertainment, education. Talk about why the arts need to be free, and you focus on this tool aspect. So on the op, you don't want to make kind of like absolute decisions, right? So you support freedom and you want to let more organic, bottom-up, you want a more organic bottom-up approach to creating change because you think that's fairer to everybody who's involved and more sustainable, right? Let's look at arguments. Firstly, violent entertainment hurts no one, and this is where you're trying to separate. You say it has no impact. Secondly, it expresses a reality. Okay, now you talk about the role of artists. And finally, and this is where it may seem slightly counterintuitive, but you try to run an argument on how it may actually improve the battle against gender violence, right? Which is going to be the focus of your debate. Firstly, violent entertainment doesn't actually hurt people. This is where you do what I was talking about earlier about about the media. It's just entertainment. You can separate the entertainment from your actions. And in fact, that's how the majority of society function. And you shouldn't punish the majority of society for the acts of a minority, right? So this is the whole majority versus minority kind of distinction, right? And that hides the problem, right? So the real problem, the real causes are something else. and it's not the music. And even if you say that there can be some kind of correlation, you can't completely remove violence from society. There's always going to be some kind of correlation. So this is merely entertainment, not really any kind of direct correlation. Right now, you can talk about, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact in terms of how you feel, right? But the challenge is to separate what you feel from how people act. Yes, I can listen to propaganda music and be really patriotic, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and join the army, right? And a lot of people listen to that. So I can listen to this music and feel, bad. I can feel good. Because the music is complex. There is the beat. There are all of these other things that are intertwined in it. There is there is sexist tropes in society. And if an artist wants to use these sexist tropes to portray a song and an idea, then the artist has that right to do it. And I have the right to be entertained by it. Okay? So that's the first big argument about entertainment. But secondly, talk about how, and this is where you get into a bit of a utility part of it, right? That it may have a role, that it may express a reality, that it may be required in that situation, and it becomes very subjective. Who draws the line on what is necessary and not necessary? Who gets to say this is glorification, this isn't really a legitimate depiction, right? And we think that it's unfair that the government does it or an authority does it. And talk about how that artist has this right, but also this specific entertainment, this specific tool can create change, right? Can depict that role, that is an actual reality. Now, does it help people to be depicted in that sense? It creates an awareness around it. There is the fallout. There is a discourse, right? And you can run this discourse idea. There's a counter narrative. Okay. These artists who do it take a risk. These artists are used as examples about bad things. You can have a debate about what these individuals do and what they have said and how people, enjoy it. So, the two things we should break out from here. One is that this glorification of sexism or of violence is the same aspect of how people or art glorifies things that society may not consider to be good, but art is doing it in order to evoke a response. And that is one of the role of art, right? From an artist's perspective. But secondly, doing that can help people understand what's happening, can create a reaction that may be positive for the role for society in general. And that's one role that art plays. Okay, so that's the thing about art. And finally, it may improve the battle against gender violence. It understands and more complex causes. It helps combat these stereotypes, right? And the idea is not to suppress them and to hide them from everybody else in society. The idea is for us to bring it out there so that it's visible and people can fight them. Okay, so I've touched some of that already. So there you have it, the both sides of the debates. On one side, does media have any kind of role? On the other side, it has an incredibly powerful impact, right? Now, think about all the music that you've listened to. This is one of the debates where I'm sure you have some kind of exposure to this violence. So this is a debate about you. You are shaping it as a consumer, and it is shaping you as a listener of this music, okay? So, and media in general. Good luck debating debates about violence in the media.